Hey everybody! Last class we began our mountain landscape painting. This is the final result, but this is what we got to. We made our sky, our mountains, and the beginning of the ground. So let's start from scratch so everyone can catch up to where we are or watch this just to get those techniques down again. The big scary part of this painting is that we're using our palette knives, and we'll go over some techniques for that. Besides your palette knives, you're going to need a rounded brush. That just means there's no corners on it. And a couple square brushes. That means corners are encouraged. Make sure you have your water. And then to begin our sky, I have a few different colors. A lot of white, some light blue, some middle blue, a little teal, and a little hot pink. Those are the colors I'm choosing for my sky. Feel free to get different with it. The main painting technique we're working on today is only adding a little bit of paint at a time to our brush. So we can paint and paint until there's nothing left. We're going to focus on really pushing the paint around. If we get a whole glob, it never dries and we run out of paint really quickly. So here we go. I'm going to start with a little bit of paint on my brush. No water yet. I'm going to make my sky. I will be adding a lot of white because white makes the sky look soft and it blends all the colors together beautifully. If you feel like things are too dry, add a little bit of water, but never too much. Less is more. Make your sky end in the middle of your painting. The bottom half of the painting will be your water. It will be a reflection of the sky. So whatever sky you make, it will be a reflection in the water. We'll go over that next. This sky is cute, but it needs some fun colors in there. So now I've got my teal. I'm going to start doing some swipes. And a little bit of pink. If a color seems too harsh, add that white. You can never go wrong. Now that I'm at the middle, I'm going to reflect my sky in my water. It does not have to be exact. It's just a general blueprint to work from. So my water will start with teal. My camera doesn't pick up all the right colors, so I'm going to take photos of these steps in between. Now it's time to create clouds. Grab your rounded brush. I'm going to use only white and my pink for this. The pink will be an occasional hue of a different color just besides white. The technique for the clouds is interesting. We're going to start by not defining the shape of the whole cloud, but just dabbing where the top will be. This technique involves me just dabbing up and down and allowing the paint on my brush to run dry. This makes a perfect fade into the sky. I'm going to repeat that a few more times for a few different clouds. Also, Don't be afraid to let some clouds run off the page, because in reality, nothing's perfectly centered in your painting or in a photo. I have a lot of paint here. It's really globbed up, so I'll start spreading it around. If I want my cloud to look fluffier, I'll make some circular rotations. I have too much paint on my brush, so I'm going to wipe it off and then continue. A dry brush picks up more paint. I adjusted my lighting a little bit, so unfortunately we have the shadow of the camera, but just try to ignore it. I will continue dabbing so the bottom fades away and the tops are defined. Circles for fluffy, dabs for small. Wipe off if you have too much paint. This cloud is pretty, but it's all one tone. It's kind of flat compared to its other friendly clouds over here. To make it look nice and vibrant, I'm going to add a highlight, which is another layer of white starting at the top. Wherever the cloud is thickest in white, that means the cloud is more full there, and people will see that it has some depth to it. Now keep in mind, my paintbrush is not straight up and down. It's pretty much sideways. So if I were to hold the canvas to you, my paintbrush is like this, not this. Now I'm going to add some pink to my clouds. The pink shows some atmospheric change. Maybe it's closer to sunset or sunrise and there's a little color in the clouds. I also have a little pink in my sky, so that shows there might be some pink clouds further away. I'm going to take just the tiniest amount of pink and dab it into my clouds, which are still a little wet. If they're all dry, it won't blend as well. So make sure you have a little white and pink together if your clouds are too dry. Too much paint. And now I'm using the same dabbing method, but really trying to use just the bare amount of pink that I can. Just here and there. I'm not going to evenly coat everything in pink. It's just going to be a suggestion every so often. If you want your clouds to have a little hint of yellow, that's also beautiful. Sometimes just a purple or even a brighter pink is good. Now I think purple has taken over these clouds too much, so I'm going to build back my white. Too much paint on my brush, so I wipe it off. Next, I'm going to define the rim of my mountain. So I'm going to wash off that brush, dry it out, set it to the side. Now I'm going to pick a squared brush. This one has an angle to it, but a square one works just fine. I'm going to need a few new colors, so I'm setting this to the side and grabbing a new plate. When it comes to your mountain, you're going to need 4 colors: your shadow color, your highlight color, your mid-tone color, and white. These 3 should be a dark, middle, and light version of the same color. I chose blue. My main mountain will be blue. It'll have a light blue highlight and a dark blue shadow, and then white will come in later. Some people like to choose purple, some people choose gray. All I recommend is not choosing brown. So I will now define the top of my mountain with my mid-tone color, so middle blue. It doesn't matter too much what your mountain looks like, but mine's gonna have a little, my mountain is gonna have a big point in the middle, and it can't go too much lower than the middle of the painting. So make sure the ground evens off at the side, the middle. In fact, I think mine should be taller. Come on, it's a mountain painting. If it's easier, find a reference of a mountain you think is pretty. Next thing we're going to do is fill in the mountain. Now keep in mind, we don't want a straight line at the bottom defining where the ground is. That's no good. What we want is it to fade in to the rest of our painting. Like that. So let's fill in our mountain and then we'll fade the bottom line. So I'm fading the bottom of my mountain, which is good, but it's a little dry and I'm getting those weird little lines I don't like. So I'm going to go back with the color that's right here, it doesn't have to be exact, and push back into my mountain. If it's not perfect, it's okay. I just don't want to see a hard line. Palette knives. So get those out and set your painting to the side for a second. Find either a paper plate or another canvas to practice on. I'm going to practice on a piece of paper. So forget what you know about painting with a paintbrush. This is not a paintbrush. This is a tool that scrapes and pulls paint. And I'm going to show you guys an example of that. I'm going to have my shadow example. I'm going to get a good amount on the tip of my brush. And I'm going to hover flat over the paper. I'll show you that on its side. Whoop. If this paper is laying flat, whoop, so is my palette knife. So straight down, I'm going to barely touch the page. And once I feel that it's touched the page, I scrape and pull. And that's how you make a mountain design. Whenever you see Bob Ross or any of those painters make fun, quick designs on a mountain, this is the technique. They get a little bit of paint and they barely touch the painting and pull. So now we're going to do it on the real thing. I suggest practicing that until you feel like you got a good rhythm. But here we go. Now I'm going to decide what side of my mountain is the light side and the dark side, because we need our light to really hit one or another. I'm going to have the light on the right side and the dark on the left. Let's do the dark side first. I'm taking my palette knife with just a little bit of paint and I'm touching the very top of my mountain, hovering over it, barely touching. I slide and scrape. It might not look like much at first, but it's defining some kind of texture, all on the right side. It's easy and it impresses your friends. If you find yourself trying to paint like a paintbrush and tapping, remind yourself it should be almost flat. Some people like a little tilt, but really flat. There we go. I'm going to wipe off my palette knife that is. And now I'm going to do the same thing with my light blue for the highlight on the opposite side of the mountain. With my light blue, I get it on my palette. I horizontally hold it pretty flat, and I meet where the shadow is and do the same technique. The goal is not to cover up the whole mountain. It's to add another layer of depth. Remember to pull in the direction the mountain falls. So if you were to go straight down, that makes no sense. Mountains don't go straight down. They're like pyramids. So let's get rid of that. Don't worry, I'll paint over it. Instead, pull. Using different palette knives is very legitimate. This one has a really good point to it. Good for little details. And now that all that's done, the bulk of it is there. I'm going to go back and add some details with my lowlights and highlights and midtones. And you can do this as many times as you want until you feel satisfied. But just remember, the key to actually liking your painting is taking a step back and analyzing it from afar. All of these paintings, these impressionist paintings, are meant to really shine when you take a step back and see all these blobs of paint for what they are meant to become. If you feel like there's too much paint on your canvas and you can't do anything with it, it just blends immediately, go blow dry it. Start with a dry canvas, it's much better. Your white highlight. The same method is going to make beautiful highlights on the top of your mountain. The brightest highlight on anything is always on the border between the light and the dark. Like that. It implies maybe a little bit of snow, but most importantly, this is the brightest part of the mountain where the sun is hitting hardest. I'll do it on all my little peaks. Never feel like you need to start with a lot of paint on your brush. Always get more. Now, one mistake is just making blobs. That's no good. If you've made a blob, get all that brush off your palette knife and spread out that blob. The final step in reaching to where we got to last class is grass. So, enough with the palette knife, take a breather. Grab a square brush. We're going to define where the outline of the grass is, which will define where our river is. In the example, the grass leads the river back to the mountain. So it's not flat, it's being pushed into the distance. So let's do that now. So I've selected 2 greens and 2 yellows. Wow, look at my hands. Okay, so I want a lime green, or at least a light bright green. My mid-tone green looks kind of black on the video, but it's just a slightly darker green. A nice bright yellow, and a goldish color. I don't remember what it's called. For me, it's called bronze yellow, but in your kits, it's something else. But it's a great color for bringing some realism into these paintings. So, bring this down. Take a square brush. A little bit of water, not too much. And we're going to define where this goes. We're not defining the top. We're just defining the river's outline. So don't get too close to that mountain. I'm cutting mine off here, and I'm painting it in with that same color. I have a lot of paint on my canvas. It's so much that it's going to cause a problem later. In that case, I need to wipe off all the excess paint, dry off my brush, and start picking up this paint and recycling it for later. The reason for that is we don't want a harsh line once we fill to the top. Just like how we did with the bottom of the mountain, we're going to blend. This part of the painting will be covered up, the blending horizon line, so don't worry if it's not perfect. Don't bother blending it with the real color. I mean with the background color. Then finally, as it goes back, the end of the river gets pretty close to touching, because that's how far back it is. There is one more step, and it involves a fan brush technique. You don't need a fan brush to do this. Something else that suffices is maybe like a dry, beat up brush, or any brush will do, preferably not square. The corners don't work with things like grass. It makes it too rigid. So I brought fan brushes for everyone in class last time, and I'll bring one for you when you come to class again. So I'll show you the technique we used, and then I'll show you how to do it with a regular brush. You're going to load a dry brush with just a little bit of paint. Loading means you're prepping it to go on the canvas before the paint actually gets there. A little bit of every color. Never too much. So if you look, I've got all the colors there, and I'm going to hold it sideways. So if you can see the canvas, it's just hovering over. Not like this, from the side. So hovering on the side and tap, tap, tap. And now we've got mounds of beautiful grass. If you missed last class and you want to wait to do the grass, give it a shot, make some texture with your regular brushes or whatever you have around, and when you get to class, we can wrap it up. Because I'll have a fan brush for you there. Try to avoid painting on the border of the river, because then, or I mean on the border of the river is where the grass is the darkest. Now our ground isn't flat anymore. It's rounded. It's got mounds of beautiful grass and potentially flowers in there. Whatever it suggests to your eye is correct. Now let's do it with a round brush on the other side. Same deal. I'm loading up my brush with different colors. Everything's on there. I'm going to hold it horizontally, not like this, but on the side, and just start tapping. I think more than one method makes things really cool. It's almost like different plants growing. Wow, yeah, okay, this is cool. It should be over here too. Boop, boop, boop. Break it up. Maybe this side has grass and this side has shrubberies. I've made the mistake of getting too much paint on my brush. Now everything's blending together and making a muddy look. So I'm wiping off my brush, picking up the extra paint, and getting it out of my way. Trying again. And that is all we got to. Great job, you guys.